The drizzle outside Dr. Evelyn Reed's window in her cramped West London flat was relentless, a typical miserable English night. The sound was a dull, constant percussion against the glass, barely audible over the low hum of the desktop computer that dominated the small space she called her study. Dr. Reed, a figure once lauded in the hallowed halls of Oxford's astrophysics department, now existed in self-imposed exile, trading the polished prestige of academia for the gritty pursuit of forgotten truths. Her small dwelling, far too expensive for the quiet life she led, was crammed with towering stacks of ancient texts, brittle Babylonian clay tablet replicas, and printouts of obscure telemetry data, the wreckage of a career sacrificed on the altar of the forbidden. What happens when the line between cosmology and ancient myth dissolves? What if the celestial mechanics we meticulously chart are merely a cover story for something vast, ancient, and terrifyingly cyclical? This is the question that had consumed Dr. Reed for 5 years, ever since the day she was quietly but firmly ushered out of the university system for proposing theories that deviated too sharply from the accepted narrative, specifically the narrative of the solar system's stability. Her obsession was focused on the legend of Nibiru, the mythical 12th planet, home of the Anunnaki, the figures Sumerian texts claimed were the architects of human civilization. Mainstream science dismissed it as fantasy, a misunderstanding of cuneiform translated into sensationalism by the late Zecharia Sitchin. But Dr. Reed saw mathematical patterns in the chaos, echoes in the dark. The catalyst for her current frantic activity wasn't a sudden new grant or a fresh peer review. It was a comet, specifically Comet C 2019Y4, known globally by its discovery designation Atlas. When Atlas was first observed, it was just another icy wanderer, a relatively pedestrian spectacle hurtling inward from the vast, cold emptiness of the outer solar system. But Dr. Reed's eye, trained to spot the anomalous, caught something subtle in the early trajectory models. The initial predicted path, meticulously calculated and signed off by international bodies, seemed to her slightly off. Not enough to alarm the wider astronomical community who were focused on its spectacular brightness and subsequent frustrating fragmentation, but enough to trigger a deeply buried anxiety within Evelyn. She spent months running parallel calculations, feeding the raw orbital mechanics into her own bespoke, non-standard Newtonian simulator, a piece of software she had coded herself to account for theoretical, distant gravitational perturbations that the official models deliberately ignored. She was looking for the ghost in the machine, the subtle tug of an unseen, massive companion. She was looking for Nibiru. Tonight, the flickering screen confirmed her deepest fears. The simulation had converged. The initial faint deviation in Atlas's path, the reason it shattered so spectacularly far from the sun, was not due to volatile ice sublimating rapidly. It was due to a gravitational lens, a sharp, momentary tug from an object of immense planetary mass, currently nestled deep within the unexplored reaches of the Oort cloud, yet heading inexorably towards its perihelion. The trajectory of Atlas, if extrapolated backward, crossed a specific line in space at a specific time. And that line, she realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach, corresponded precisely to the predicted ancient return path of Nibiru, as extrapolated from the most obscure and complex astronomical tablets held under lock and key in the deep vaults of the British Museum. The comet hadn't merely shattered. It had been aligned, pulled into a fateful trajectory that acted as a celestial marker, an astronomical omen pointing directly at the return of the ancient gods. The Anunnaki omen was no longer myth, it was physics. The cold, objective data provided a terrifying confirmation of the Sumerian prophecies, predictions spanning millennia. Evelyn stared at the data, the fluorescent green figures swimming before her eyes in the gloom of the flat. a world away from the manicured lawns of her former campus life. Her breathing hitched, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. She instinctively reached out and touched the cold metal casing of her monitor, as if to ground herself in the reality of the small room, desperately trying to reject the vast cosmic dread the numbers instilled. The very air in the flat felt heavier, charged with the momentous weight of this secret knowledge. The old walls, damp and crumbling, seemed to press in on her, echoing the pressure cooker environment of secrecy she had constructed around herself. If this beginning already made you rethink what you thought you knew, imagine what is coming next. So go ahead and leave your like and subscribe to the channel right now. Because here, every video reveals something that few dare to show. The air in the restricted archives of the British Museum held a dry, musty scent, a mixture of centuries of preserved paper and ancient clay. Evelyn, during her short tenure of official respectability, had managed to secure access to the rarest of the rare, the astronomical tablets from Nineveh brought back by Victorian explorers. These weren't the widely studied texts. These were the fragments, the cracked corners, the bits deemed too esoteric or too damaged to be properly catalogued as useful science. She remembered the weight of tablet K3500 in her gloved hands, its intricate wedge-shaped script cuneiform, describing what appeared to be a complex, eccentric orbit of a massive celestial body. The tablet was cracked down the middle, yet the narrative flow of the text, painstakingly translated, spoke of Sar, a cycle of 3,600 Earth years, and the descent of the luminous ones, when the winged disk crossed the outer reaches of the heavens. The Anunnaki, according to the Sumerian record, were beings who descended from the heavens to earth, initiating advanced civilization, manipulating human genetics, and establishing kingship. They were often depicted with wings or cloaked in a star-patterned robe, always associated with the symbol of the winged disk. For years, scholars had comfortably interpreted this disk as a highly stylized sun or a metaphor for divine power. But Dr. Reid, grounded in the rigid logic of celestial mechanics, saw something different. A planet. Not just any planet, but one whose orbit, based on her reverse-engineered calculations from the K. Text was highly elliptical, taking it far beyond Pluto, only to loop back into the inner system on a catastrophic trajectory. This was Nibiru. The fundamental disconnect that led to her professional downfall was simple. She insisted that the Sumerians possessed astronomical knowledge, not just observational, but predictive and mathematically complex, that should have been impossible for a Bronze Age culture. She argued that this knowledge had to be imparted by someone or something. The Anunnaki provided the logical, albeit professionally suicidal answer. The discovery of Atlas in 2019 provided the terrifying physical confirmation. Comets, by their very nature, are unpredictable. Their paths are generally dictated by solar heat and orbital mechanics. But Atlas had a bizarre acceleration profile early in its observation run, an almost gravitational slingshot effect that standard models simply couldn't account for. The general explanation provided by reputable institutions, the very institutions that had dismissed Evelyn, was fragmentation due to high volatile content. A neat, tidy explanation designed to contain any undue alarm. Evelyn, however, had the key to the ancient lock. If Nibiru was returning on its 3,600-year cycle, its immense gravitational field, even at the edge of the Oort cloud, would begin to subtly shepherd the smaller, more fragile bodies like comets. Atlas wasn't shattering because of physics internal to the comet. It was being torn by the gravitational sheer force of a nearby unseen planet. The shattering, ironically, was the distress signal that proved Nibiru's proximity. The alignment, the specific point where Atlas's fragmented remnants now crossed the Nibiru orbital plane, served as a precise marker. It was a cosmic triangulation, confirming the ancient omens were ticking down to zero. The thought settled heavily in Evelyn's mind, like the persistent damp fog that often blankets the Thames, chilling her to the bone. The sheer audacity of the ancient record, preserving this moment across millennia, felt overwhelming. She remembered the scent of the museum archive, the hush of deep history. It was a mausoleum of silenced facts. She knew that the official astronomers at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich were running the same numbers, or at least they had access to the data that allowed her to run hers. But they had chosen their narrative: stability, uniformity, and the comfortable dismissal of myth. To admit the possibility of Nibiru was to destabilize the entire framework of modern astronomy, and perhaps more dangerously, to validate the possibility of highly advanced, non-human intelligence visiting Earth millennia ago. The implications were too grand, too world-shattering for the establishment to accept. They preferred the mundane explanation, the fragmentation of a celestial snowball, to the terrifying truth of a returning planet and its powerful inhabitants. The cost of admission was too high, the disruption too immense, and thus the scientific community, funded by cautious governmental bodies, maintained the facade of certainty. This complicity, this silent agreement to ignore the impossible, fueled Evelyn's lonely crusade more than any public declaration ever could. She understood that silence wasn't just a choice, it was a powerful tool of control. If you have made it this far without pausing, it is because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content, hit the like button now and send it to someone who needs to see this. Dr. Reed's workspace was defined by controlled chaos. Every paper, every stack of books had a specific, if visually confusing, purpose. The screen glowed, illuminating her face, etched with fatigue and determination. She was now comparing the orbital elements of Atlas post-fragmentation with hypothetical models of a 10-Earth mass planet moving through the far solar system. The sheer mass required to induce that specific shear stress on the comet's nucleus was immense, far greater than the hypothetical Planet 9, currently being debated by Caltech researchers. That theoretical planet, even if real, was too small and too far out to explain the timing and magnitude of the Atlas event. Evelyn's model, however, placed a body roughly 4 times the size of Earth, with a highly magnetic field, entering the inner Oort cloud now, accelerating towards its perihelion. The calculations were robust. They terrified her because they were mathematically sound. The primary difficulty lay in the data acquisition. The official telemetry from space telescopes and ground arrays, like those operated by Jodrell Bank and ESO, was deliberately obscured. Subtle errors were introduced, filtering mechanisms were applied, and most crucially, the deep space tracking data was held under high classification, often hidden behind the innocuous firewall of national security space monitoring. Evelyn relied on leaked fragments, often sent anonymously via encrypted channels by disillusioned junior astronomers or systems engineers who had stumbled upon the inconsistencies themselves. She clicked through a series of spreadsheets, showing gravitational perturbations in the orbits of distant trans-Neptunian objects, TNOs. The movement of Sedna, for instance, had always been puzzlingly eccentric. Standard gravity accounted for 90% of its motion. It was the remaining 10%, the unexplained drift, that screamed of Nibiru. But when she overlaid the projected Nibiru path, the path derived from K3500, with the observed TNO anomalies, the correlation was statistically undeniable. "They cannot ignore this," she muttered to herself, running a weary hand through her short greying hair. Her accent, a crisp, educated Oxford tone, carried the weight of her former status. It's beyond coincidence. It is objective alignment. The physical alignment itself wasn't just astronomical, it was chronological. The Sumerian texts, when synchronized with modern dating methods, suggested a major shift, a cataclysm, approximately every 3,600 years. The last known major shift associated with widespread global flooding, the basis for the Mesopotamian and later biblical flood myths, dated back roughly 4,000 years, accounting for orbital drift and slight variations in the cycle. This current cycle was due. The window of probability was closing fast, and Atlas was the cosmic alarm clock. Evelyn remembered a heated confrontation with Professor Alastair Finch, head of the Royal Astronomical Society, 3 years prior. Finch, a man whose career was built on rigorous conservative cosmology, had dismissed her findings with a wave of his hand and a cold, condescending smile. "Dr. Reed," Finch had said, his voice dripping with polite contempt in the echoing stone hall of the Oxford Library, "we do not base modern astrophysics on the misinterpretations of damaged clay tablets. The universe is a clockwork mechanism, not a mythical drama scripted by ancient priests. If there were a 10th planet of that magnitude approaching, we would see it. The perturbation to the Martian and Jovian orbits would be catastrophic, immediately obvious. Your calculations, while complex, are founded on a premise of fictional interference." Evelyn had argued that the interference was subtle precisely because of Nibiru's unique trajectory, coming in high on the ecliptic plane, spending most of its time far outside the gravitational dominance of the Sun's immediate neighbors. Its interaction was primarily with the distant, fragile Kuiper Belt and Oort cloud inhabitants, bodies the establishment cared little about, until one of them, Atlas, screamed into the public consciousness. Now, sitting alone, the gravity of her truth was suffocating. She knew Finch was part of the apparatus of suppression, perhaps not maliciously, but through institutional inertia and an unwillingness to accept a paradigm shift of this magnitude. It was easier to explain away a shattered comet than to face the return of the Anunnaki. Easier to let the world continue focusing on mundane crises, the latest political scandal in Westminster or the Premier League fixtures, than to prepare for a cosmic event foretold by dirt-caked artifacts. The knowledge that the establishment, the very guardians of truth, were actively choosing ignorance solidified her conviction. They weren't just skeptical. They were complacent, perhaps even complicit in a colossal cover-up that had roots stretching back through governmental and academic history, a tradition of keeping the masses placid and uninformed, maintaining control through the soothing balm of routine and predictable reality. The very fabric of societal trust was woven with this thread of deliberate omission. The next morning, London was obscured by a thick, oppressive pea superfog, the kind that dampens sound and makes the pavement slick and dangerous. Evelyn emerged from her flat, pulling her trench coat tighter against the chill. She needed physical materials, more advanced processing power and, crucially, untraceable access to a secure network. Her own computers were safe, but she had to assume that the moment she started running high-level simulations using the leaked data she had received, she would become a target for immediate digital surveillance. Her destination was a small, dusty internet cafe in a less fashionable corner of Notting Hill, run by an old university mate, Liam, who was a wizard with firewalls and had a healthy disrespect for authority. Liam didn't know the full extent of her work. He thought she was consulting on high-level financial risk analysis, but he guaranteed anonymity and speed. As she navigated the crowded streets, the sounds of city life, the screech of a double-decker bus, the hurried conversations of commuters clutching their flat whites, the distant dull clang of works being undertaken, seemed dissonant. How could life be so normal when a massive disruptive body was accelerating towards the inner system? She observed the faces passing her on the street, noting the preoccupation with the immediate, the trivial. They worried about their mortgage rates, whether they'd get a seat on the tube or if they had remembered to set the washing machine before leaving the house. None of them looked up. None of them suspected the profound, silent shift occurring above the clouds. This ignorance, she mused, was both a blessing and a terrifying vulnerability. It protected them from the immediate panic, but made them catastrophically unprepared for the inevitable impact, be it geological, sociological, or the return of the Anunnaki themselves. Evelyn needed to focus on the why. Why would the Anunnaki choose the alignment of Atlas to signal their return? The Sumerian tablets weren't just astronomical, they were liturgical. They spoke of the Anunnaki arriving to harvest something. Gold, according to Sitchin, needed to repair their planet's atmosphere. Evelyn found this rationale too simplistic, too anthropocentric. A civilization capable of interstellar travel and planetary manipulation wouldn't be desperate for a single element easily obtained through less effortful means. She hypothesized a deeper, more profound connection. The harvest wasn't mineral, it was biological or informational. She reasoned that Nibiru's orbit was designed, not accidental. It was a preset calendar, the alignment of a visible, if fragile, comet like Atlas with that orbital plane provided a perfect, subtle mechanism for activation. It was a cosmic tripwire. Perhaps the Anunnaki had left monitoring technology or signal beacons on Earth, keyed to that specific alignment. The shattering of Atlas might not just be a consequence of Nibiru's gravity, but a deliberate, engineered event, a massive temporary flare-up of light and debris designed to be seen from the far reaches of the system, a dramatic signal that the cosmic clock had reset. At Liam's cafe, the smell of stale frying oil and strong espresso hung in the air. Liam, a lanky man with thick glasses perched precariously on his nose, greeted her with a nod and led her to a shielded booth at the back, next to the perpetually broken pinball machine. "Got the usual setup, Ev?" Liam murmured, tapping quickly on a keyboard. "VPN chain, routed through Reykjavik and Ulaanbaatar. Nobody's sniffing this traffic unless they've got GCHQ money." "Brilliant, Liam. I appreciate it," she replied, her voice low. She pulled a microdrive from her pocket. "I need to run a brute force model. I'm simulating the cumulative gravitational effects on the entire inner Oort cloud, assuming a 15 Earth mass body approaching from the southeast quadrant, high on the ecliptic." Liam raised an eyebrow. 15 Earth masses. That's colossal, mate. What kind of theoretical astrophysics are we doing now? Trying to debunk the entire solar system? "Something like that," Evelyn said, avoiding his gaze. "Just let the calculation run. It'll take hours." As the machine whirred to life, processing unimaginable amounts of data, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The coffee tasted bitter, yet strangely vital. She was working outside the accepted parameters of science, using technology provided by a man who saw the internet as a playground, all to prove a truth drawn from clay tablets thousands of years old. The irony was palpable, the juxtaposition of Sumerian prophecy and cutting-edge supercomputing starkly illuminated by the glare of the monitor. She was alone in this. The weight of the world's ignorance pressed down on her. You already sense the magnitude of this disclosure. You feel the tension building, the cosmic clock ticking away in the background of a seemingly normal London day. If you have made it this far without pausing, it is because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and send it to someone who needs to see this. The atmosphere in Liam's back room was one of relentless focus, broken only by the intermittent clatter of coffee cups and the distant chatter of oblivious patrons discussing Brexit and rising fuel prices. Evelyn watched the simulation progress, the raw data streaming across the screen, visualizing the intricate dance of distant icy bodies being subtly, but definitively, reorganized by the gravitational hand of the unseen Nibiru. She zoomed in on the region of space where Atlas had fragmented. The simulation showed a violent, localized gravitational gradient that would have subjected the comet's nucleus to stresses equivalent to being pulled through a cosmic taffy machine. Fragmentation wasn't just likely, it was mandatory under those conditions. The sheer meticulousness of the ancient Sumerian records suddenly gained terrifying new weight. If the Anunnaki intended the Atlas event as a marker, It suggested an almost unimaginable level of long-term planning, a mastery of celestial mechanics spanning millennia. They didn't just understand physics, they leveraged the random movements of the cosmos for their own scheduling purposes. Doctor. Reed took a moment to review her original translations of a particular tablet fragment, one that detailed the encounter of the shepherd and the Star of the South. Scholars had assumed this described a minor conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, but Evelyn believed the shepherd referred to a specific constellation associated with the Anunnaki, perhaps a key navigational marker used during their long elliptical journey through space. The text spoke of a signal of disruption when the shepherd encountered a faint, hairy star, an ancient description of a comet near the edge of the known celestial sphere. This alignment, the text ominously warned, marked the beginning of the Seven Thunders, a period of intense terrestrial upheaval preceding the full arrival of the winged disk. If Evelyn's astronomical interpretation was correct, the alignment of Three-Eye Atlas with the theoretical Nibiru path was not the climax. It was merely the opening salvo. The Seven Thunders suggested a sequence of events, perhaps gravitational, perhaps climatic, that would make Earth unstable long before the planet itself became visible to amateur telescopes. She ran a sub-simulation focusing on the gravitational effects on Earth's magnetosphere and mantle during Nibiru's deep approach. The results were disturbing. Even from that immense distance, the mass would exert tidal forces strong enough to increase the rate of volcanic and seismic activity globally. If the cycle was repeating, the flood myths were merely the beginning of the potential devastation. The Anunnaki weren't just returning to visit. Their very presence in the inner solar system was a potential extinction-level event for terrestrial life as we knew it. The thought made her hands shake. She wasn't just verifying a historical curiosity. She was forecasting a global catastrophe. She looked out the small, grimy window of the cafe, watching a young woman struggle with an oversized umbrella, fighting the relentless London wind. That woman and everyone else going about their daily routine were completely unaware of the fate being shaped by a distant, unseen giant. You already sense the magnitude of this disclosure. The narrative voice inside her head seemed to whisper. You feel the tension building? The cosmic clock ticking away in the background of a seemingly normal London day. What would you do if you knew the truth that Evelyn holds? The meticulous nature of her work demanded absolute precision, yet the emotional weight of her conclusions threatened to destabilize her sanity. She sipped her lukewarm coffee, the taste of burnt grounds and paranoia a steady companion. Her isolation was profound. When she had first proposed the Nibiru model, the ridicule was immediate and absolute. Her colleagues had treated her like a crank, a once brilliant mind devolved into a conspiracy theorist. Now she held the evidence that they were wrong, terrifyingly wrong, but the mechanism of official denial had already done its work. Her voice carried no authority in the current climate. She noticed Liam approaching her booth, wiping his hands on a grease-stained apron. He leaned in, his voice dropping. Ev, that calculation is chewing up a lot of bandwidth. And I've noticed a peculiar traffic spike, not coming from the usual places either. Not standard government IP, but something cleaner. Very fast, very deliberate. They're pinging the routing chain. Evelyn felt a jolt of ice water run through her veins. How clean! Like highly skilled private contractors, maybe corporate security, but with access to state-level surveillance tools, Liam whispered, checking the empty tables around them. Look, I'm good, but if they want to find this traffic, they will. They're not looking for risk analysis, they're looking for you. The simulation results confirmed the impending disaster, but the surveillance confirmation brought the threat into immediate personal focus. The suppression was not passive, it was active. Someone, or some organization, knew she was close to connecting the dots between Atlas and the Anunnaki. They weren't just monitoring the sky, they were monitoring her cramped flat, her emails, and now her anonymous computing efforts. This intensified the urgency. She had the mathematical proof, but now she had a deadline imposed by the shadowy figures determined to maintain the facade of stability. The air in the cafe, previously smelling of coffee and freedom, now reeked of fear and impending discovery. Evelyn knew she had mere hours, perhaps less, before her refuge evaporated entirely. Evelyn rapidly saved the simulation results onto 3 separate heavily encrypted drives. The data package was enormous, terabytes of gravitational anomaly maps, orbital projection comparisons, and cross-referenced Sumerian translations. This wasn't just theory, this was the smoking gun, detailing not only the existence of Nibiru, but its proximity and the timing of the alignment. Liam returned, looking genuinely nervous. "Ev, I'm shutting down this terminal." That traffic spike turned into a steady stream. They're trying to flood the lower nodes to force a reroute. I can keep them busy for a bit, but you need to vanish. Right now. Evelyn nodded curtly. She knew Liam was risking his entire operation, perhaps his freedom for her. "Thank you, mate. You're a lifesaver." "Just don't tell me what you're doing," he pleaded, his voice tight. "I sleep better not knowing which ancient gods are coming back to demand tribute." She gathered her belongings, her movements economical and precise. She paused only to look at the screen one last time, where the model showed the projected path of Nibiru sweeping through the solar plane like a cosmic wrecking ball. The planet wasn't going to hit Earth, not directly, but the gravitational wake would be devastating, shifting tectonic plates, triggering supervolcanoes, and potentially disrupting Earth's rotational axis, the very definition of the 7 thunders described in the tablets. Her next move had to be calculated. She couldn't go back to her flat. It would be the first place they checked, perhaps already under surveillance. She needed to disseminate the data widely and immediately before the establishment could execute a full media blackout, or worse, a physical intervention. She thought of Alistair Finch. She needed to force his hand, to make him look like a fool or a conspirator when the evidence became undeniable. But she couldn't rely on academic channels. They were too slow, too prone to institutional control. She needed a voice that resonated with skepticism and reached the masses directly. The obvious choice was independent media, the dedicated documentary channels that specialized in the fringe, the unexplained, the controversial. But those channels were also easily dismissed as sensationalist. She needed legitimacy. She decided to target 2 points simultaneously: a respected, if slightly maverick science journalist who had been sympathetic to her initial research, and a high-ranking political figure known for asking inconvenient questions in Parliament. A member of Parliament, ideally one known for a certain disdain for the Whitehall deep state. Leaving the cafe, Evelyn merged into the afternoon crowd, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible. She kept her head down, moving quickly across the pavement, avoiding eye contact. The humid air felt sticky, clinging to her skin. She had 3 encrypted drives in her bag. One contained the raw data and Sumerian translation correlations. The second, her detailed paper on the astronomical significance of the Atlas alignment, and the third, a personalized message, a plea for the truth, addressed to the world. As she passed a newsagent's window, she glanced at the headlines. Nothing about cosmic threats, all standard domestic worries. This stark contrast between the normalcy of the street and the catastrophic truth she carried made her feel utterly alien, divorced from the reality of her fellow Londoners. She was a silent Cassandra walking among the oblivious. The pressure of maintaining this silent burden, this colossal world-ending secret, was immense, causing a throbbing ache behind her eyes. Every hurried step felt like a drumbeat counting down to disaster. But who was chasing her? The identity of the clean surveillance traffic was critical. It suggested either a highly sophisticated arm of the state, MI5 or GCHQ, or a non-governmental entity with equally deep pockets and ruthless intentions. If it was the latter, the implications were unsettling. Were the protectors of the status quo simply government scientists, or were they agents of something older, something more directly tied to the Anunnaki legacy? The thought sent a fresh tremor of fear through her. The conspiracy might not be human at all. If you have made it this far without pausing, it is because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and send it to someone who needs to see this. Evelyn decided to use the labyrinthine London Underground network to create distance and confusion. The tube was a chaotic, organic system of movement, perfect for losing a tail. Descending into the clamour and subterranean heat of the station, the fluorescent lighting casting a sickly yellow glow on the tiled walls, she felt a momentary sense of security in the sheer volume of humanity. Yet she remained vigilant, her eyes scanning the crowds for anyone moving with too much purpose, anyone who looked out of place in the rush-hour misery. She boarded a Central Line train heading east, burrowing deep under the city. The noise was deafening, the carriage packed tight with commuters. This anonymity was her shield. She observed the worn upholstery, the smudges of grime on the windows, the advertisement posters promising fleeting comforts, a world away from the astronomical terror she held in her pocket. As the train rattled through the dark tunnels, her mind raced back to her old colleague, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a systems analyst at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, a man of immense talent and deep cynicism regarding official narratives. They had fallen out after Evelyn's disgrace, but Marcus had always maintained a quiet respect for her audacity. A few weeks ago she had received an untraceable message, a single line of coded text that referenced the Shepherd constellation and asked if she was ready for the flood tide. It was Marcus. She needed to meet him. Marcus had access to the high-level data pipelines that she no longer could touch. He was her last credible source inside the establishment's operational core. Evelyn disembarked at Liverpool Street, navigating the vast, echoing space of the station, the scent of diesel and hurried footsteps filling the air. She used a pre-arranged dead drop, a battered old letterbox near a Victorian churchyard, designated during a private conversation years before as their emergency contact point. She placed a small, folded note inside, detailing a time and location. 22 hours, the Dog and Duck pub, Covent Garden. The wait was agonizing. Evelyn spent the intervening hours in the National Gallery, losing herself among the grandeur of the Renaissance masters. She found a morbid fascination in the depiction of celestial events in classical paintings. Always beautiful, always mysterious, often portending doom. It was a stark reminder that humanity had been charting its relationship with the stars and the fear they instilled for millennia. She noticed the intricate detail in a painting of the Annunciation, observing how the artist had rendered the stars in the night sky with uncanny accuracy for the period, perhaps indicating that the ancient knowledge of the cosmos wasn't entirely lost. Even in the medieval era, it merely became hidden, woven into the fabric of religious and artistic symbolism. As the dusk settled over Trafalgar Square, Evelyn felt the chill return, but this time it was born of anticipation rather than dampness. She arrived at the Dog and Duck exactly at 10, choosing a secluded corner booth shielded by a heavy velvet curtain, ordering a half-pint of bitter, trying to look like a weary tourist rather than a cosmic revolutionary. The pub was loud, warm, and smelled strongly of stale beer, wood polish, and chips, a comforting, familiar British scent that momentarily eased her tension. Marcus arrived 10 minutes late, sliding into the opposite seat. He looked older, his face lined with the stress of institutional conformity. He wore a standard-issue, slightly rumpled suit, clearly straight from the office, perhaps having slipped away from a late meeting at the lab. "Evelyn," he greeted, his voice low, a genuine mixture of concern and anxiety. "Bloody hell, Ev. I thought you were done with this Nibiru nonsense." "It's not nonsense, Marcus. It's happening. Atlas was the marker. I've run the full gravitational models. The perturbations are catastrophic. We're talking about a multi-TNO shepherd effect caused by a body of at least 10 Earth masses. It's entering the final leg of its approach. Marcus swallowed hard, signaling the barman for a whiskey. I know. That's why I reached out. We, the core team, we're seeing the anomalies too. They're getting harder to filter. The gravitational signature is unmistakable, especially on the deep space probes like Voyager 1 and 2. Their navigation systems are showing consistent, predictable errors that only a massive, approaching object can explain. He leaned closer, his eyes darting around the noisy pub. Finch and his inner circle, they're panicking. They're not just suppressing the data, they're actively generating disinformation. They've commissioned 3 separate papers designed to re-explain the TNO eccentricities using purely internal solar system dynamics. They are scrambling to maintain the status quo at all costs. But why? Why not disclose the possibility? Prepare, Evelyn pleaded, the bitter taste of the ale catching in her throat. Fear, Ev. Pure, unadulterated, institutional terror. It's not just about debunking Sitchin. If Nibiru is real and the Anunnaki are real, it means everything they base their scientific authority on is built on a lie. It means we aren't alone, and we are, quite literally, livestock being managed by superior intelligence. The economic and social collapse would be instant. Whitehall has models for natural disaster, but not for the return of the gods. They prefer silent annihilation to public panic. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a sleek, government-issued data card, thicker than a standard credit card, clearly containing high-level encryption. He placed it discreetly under the beer mat. This is the raw, unfiltered telemetry. Orbital mechanics from the last 72 hours. Everything they didn't want you to see. It's the final confirmation. If you use this, you will be tracing the actual current position of the object, not just its projected path. Marcus paused, the weight of his betrayal of the institution evident in his weary eyes. But Evelyn, if they catch me giving you this, my career is over. My life could be too. I know, Marcus, she whispered. I won't let it be in vain. This is the only way to save us from our own complacency. The card was cool and heavy in her hand as she palmed it. It represented the final, irrefutable link between the ancient world and the impending cosmic catastrophe. The stakes had just become infinitely higher. Evelyn did not dare return to Liam's cafe or her flat. She used emergency funds to rent a small, anonymous Airbnb flat in a dull, modern development in Canary Wharf. It was impersonal, sterile, and crucially new. Unlikely to be linked to her previous digital footprint, the flat offered a stunning, if sterile, view of the glittering towers of the financial district, monuments to the very human preoccupations she was trying to warn them away from. She set up her borrowed laptop on the small glass table, the data card from Marcus slotted into a secure reader. The encryption was military-grade, designed to fail after 3 failed attempts, erasing the data instantly. This wasn't something she could casually explore. It required absolute focus. She had to crack the access code, which Marcus had provided in a series of obscure astronomical riddles whispered in the pub, then immediately run the data through her simulator. The riddle related to the precession of the equinoxes, referencing the age of the ram and the descent of the bull, Sumerian astrological markers. It took Evelyn 40 minutes of intense focus, fueled by fear and adrenaline, to translate the ancient prophecy into a modern 16-digit hexadecimal key, access granted. The telemetry data streamed onto her screen, thousands of lines of raw positional information, Doppler shifts and gravitational distortion readings from the outermost surveillance probes. This was the heartbeat of the solar system, captured and hidden by those sworn to protect the truth. She immediately fed the raw coordinates into her bespoke simulation model. The results didn't take long. When she overlaid the current track position of the anomaly, dubbed Project Omen, internally by Marcus's team, onto her historical Nibiru projection. The lines were not close. They were identical. The alignment was absolute. 3i Atlas had shattered precisely because it crossed the gravitational shockwave created by this massive, inbound body. And the body, Nibiru, was currently where the Sumerians said it would be, accelerating, pulling vast amounts of debris and energy with it, and heading toward a close, if non-colliding pass with Earth. The terror she felt was profound, but it was coupled with a strange, dark vindication. She wasn't mad. She hadn't thrown away her career for a ghost story. She had thrown it away for the truth, a truth so devastating that the entire global apparatus of power had conspired to hide it. She spent the next hour cross-referencing the orbital path with known historical cataclysms: the Great Flood of Sumer, the collapse of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, the mysterious Bronze Age collapse in the Mediterranean. Many of these historical turning points seemed to cluster around the 3,600-year cycle. Nibiru wasn't just a planet, it was a cosmic reset button, a force that occasionally pruned the human species, forcing us to start anew, perhaps to prevent us from reaching a level of technological advancement that might threaten the Anunnaki themselves. The realization that humanity was perhaps merely a controlled experiment, a carefully cultivated resource, was a crushing blow. It implied that the Anunnaki weren't gods in the spiritual sense, but immensely powerful farmers, returning every cycle to check on their crop. And the breaking of Atlas was the sound of the gate being opened. "What choice did they have?" Evelyn murmured, staring at the projected timeline. The closest approach was predicted for within the next 18 months. That left virtually no time for global preparation, for the construction of deep shelters, for the stockpiling of resources, certainly not enough time to communicate the danger without triggering mass hysteria and the total collapse of societal structure. She needed to move faster. Disseminating the information wasn't enough. She needed to make it impossible to ignore. She needed a platform, a megaphone that could scream louder than the silencing efforts of Finch and Whitehall. If you have made it this far without pausing, it is because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content, hit the like button now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. Evelyn awoke to the sterile morning light of the Canary Wharf flat. The tension of the previous night had solidified into cold, hard resolve. She had the data. Now she needed the distribution method. Her target remained twofold: a politically protected leak and a targeted media approach. First, the political leak. She had chosen Lady Penelope Harrington, a backbench MP known for her fervent opposition to increased surveillance powers and her tendency to embrace controversial anti-establishment causes. Harrington operated from a small office in a crumbling old Victorian building near Parliament, relying on a small, dedicated staff and a fiercely independent spirit. Evelyn knew the risk. Harrington might dismiss the data as quickly as Finch had, but the MP's reputation for dogged persistence and public distrust of the government made her an ideal first recipient. Evelyn meticulously crafted a package. She printed key sections of the telemetry data in Marcus's official format, a concise, non-theoretical summary of the Nibiru Atlas correlation, and a note urging immediate private consultation with independent astronomical experts outside of the Royal Society's orbit. To ensure the gravity of the claim was understood, she included high-resolution images of the Sumerian tablets, specifically highlighting the winged disk and the cuneiform script describing the 3,600-year cycle. She placed the package inside a sealed, nondescript manila envelope, heavily reinforced with opaque tape. Her second target was Malcolm Davies, a veteran investigative science reporter for The Guardian. Davies had covered Evelyn's initial dismissal from Oxford, offering a relatively balanced, if skeptical, piece that had saved her reputation from utter ruin. He was cautious. demanding hard evidence, but he understood the inherent conflict of interest within established scientific bodies. She didn't trust email or any digital transfer. The surveillance on her was active. Everything had to be done physically. Evelyn took the lift down from the flat, the metallic scent of the cab, and the unsettling silence magnifying her sense of isolation. On the street, the rush hour was already beginning. The sound of car horns and the rhythmic slap of briefcases against suits a dull backdrop. She hailed one of London's iconic black cabs. "House of Commons, please, and take the long route through St. James's Park." She needed the visual cover of the city's movement. During the journey, she reflected on the magnitude of the lie being maintained. Entire government departments, research facilities, and security apparatus were involved in perpetuating the comfortable illusion of stability. It wasn't just a lie of omission. It was a coordinated effort involving immense resources, probably budgeted under advanced space debris monitoring or something equally innocuous. The conspiracy was less about malign intent and more about institutional self-preservation, a collective decision to prioritize social order over terrifying truth. Upon arriving near Parliament Square, she disembarked the taxi, paying with cash. The historic buildings, Westminster Abbey, the Houses of Parliament, stood solid and reassuring, monuments to centuries of British stability. The contrast with the cosmic instability she was about to unleash was striking. Evelyn had already identified a junior staffer for Lady Harrington, a young man named Tom, who often popped out for lunch at a specific pret-a-manger nearby. She waited, watching the procession of political activity, the guarded entrances, the hurried consultations, the general atmosphere of perpetual crisis that defined Whitehall life. When Tom emerged, looking harried and absorbed in his mobile phone, Evelyn approached him quickly, her movement fluid and unexpected. "Tom, a moment please," she said, her voice commanding. Tom looked up, startled by the direct approach. "Sorry, do I know you?" "Dr. Evelyn Reed. I have an extremely sensitive document for Lady Harrington. It's urgent. It relates to the Atlas Comet data and national security." She handed him the heavy envelope. "Give this directly to her. Do not open it. Do not discuss it with anyone else in the office. Tell her it's about the winged disc." The term winged disc, a reference Harrington would not understand but would immediately flag as non-standard, was her secondary code. It was designed to pique the MP's famous curiosity. Tom, overwhelmed by the sense of clandestine urgency and the mention of national security, stammered a promise. I will, Dr. Reed. Right away." Evelyn watched him hurry back toward the fortified government buildings, a tiny, unwitting messenger carrying the fate of human civilization in a brown envelope. She had planted the seed of political disruption. Evelyn's second task involved reaching Malcolm Davies. She knew he preferred physical meetings, despising the digital trace of email for sensitive materials. Davies' office was located in a modern, glass and steel building on Fleet Street, far removed from the dusty archives and secretive government corridors she had navigated previously. She approached the building cautiously. She had chosen a disguise, a slightly oversized coat, sunglasses despite the overcast weather, and a brightly colored, expensive-looking scarf, the uniform of a well-to-do but slightly eccentric Kensington resident. She intended to blend by looking entirely superficial. She called Davies from a public phone box, a relic of analog communication, paying with a handful of old, heavy pence coins. "Malcolm, it's Evelyn Reed. I know you thought I was chasing ghosts, but I have the data now. Unfiltered telemetry, straight from the source. It confirms the Planet X theory, not as a hypothetical, but as an inbound object. The Atlas alignment was intentional." A pause stretched across the line, filled only by the distant, muffled sound of London traffic. "Evelyn, where are you? If this is real, you need to be careful. They already had their knives out for you when you were merely speculating." "I am careful. I can't come to your office. It's too exposed. Meet me in 40 minutes. The back of the St. Bride's Church garden, near the printing press memorial. Bring nothing digital. Davies agreed, his tone now sharp with professional excitement mixed with clear apprehension. He knew her reputation for severity. She wouldn't call him unless the stakes were genuinely world-altering. Evelyn walked the streets toward the church, constantly checking behind her. She utilized the reflective surfaces of shop windows to ensure she wasn't being followed. The sense of being watched persisted, a cold prickle on the back of her neck that no amount of English wool could dispel. She wondered if the traffic spike Liam had noticed was still active, tracking her phone's movement even though she wasn't using it. St. Bride's Church garden offered a quiet, secluded space amidst the commercial hubbub. It was a small sanctuary of peace, bordered by ancient walls and commemorative plaques dedicated to Fleet Street's publishing history. She sat on a stone bench, the heavy manila envelope containing the second data set resting discreetly beside her. Davies arrived precisely on time. He was a wiry man in his early 50s, wearing a tweed jacket, his face intelligent and perpetually skeptical. He didn't offer a greeting, sitting down immediately, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. "Show me, Evelyn, and it better be good. If I go to press with 'the Anunnaki are returning,' and it turns out to be bad math, my career is toast, and yours is utterly gone." Evelyn handed him the envelope. "This is not bad math, Malcolm. This is the math they didn't want you to see. It correlates the anomalous perturbations of the Voyager probes with the orbital elements derived from the Nineveh tablets. This planet is Nibiru. It is massive, and its gravitational field is what shredded Atlas, turning it into a celestial beacon." Davies opened the envelope and quickly scanned the summary sheet. His expression shifted rapidly from skepticism to professional disbelief, and then finally to a grim acceptance of the complexity of the evidence. He lingered on the printouts of the telemetry logs, noting the classification codes and the subtle telltale markings of government-issue sensor data. "Marcus Thorne," he whispered, recognizing the internal formatting structure. "You got this from the inside, didn't you? This is high-stakes treason, Evelyn. It's necessary truth, Malcolm. If we wait for Finch and the Royal Society, we will have zero warning. The planetary pass will cause catastrophic seismic activity, the Seven Thunders. We need to force a public conversation now before they can cement their cover story." Davies looked up, his gaze intense. "If I publish this, they will crush me. They will use every libel law, every national security provision, every contact they have in Whitehall to bury this and destroy me personally." "And if you don't," Evelyn challenged, her voice low but piercing, "you will be part of the lie. You will stand by as the world faces an event predicted 4,000 years ago purely because you feared a government libel suit. This is bigger than libel, Malcolm. It's existential." Davies sighed, the weight of the decision clearly visible on his shoulders. He gently closed the envelope, securing the data. "I need 24 hours to verify the source and the complexity of the models. I have 2 contacts outside the UK who I trust to look at these orbital mechanics without notifying the usual suspects. If they confirm the plausibility, I'll run it." Front page. Evelyn knew that was the best she could hope for. She had dropped the cosmic bomb. If you have made it this far without pausing, it is because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and send it to someone who needs to see this. Evelyn left Davies in the tranquil garden and moved back into the swirling chaos of Covent Garden, the bustling atmosphere of street performers and tourists providing the perfect camouflage. The energy of the crowd was infectious, yet she felt completely detached from their joy. Her immediate concern was simple survival. She had compromised a high-level government analyst, Marcus, and delivered explosive material to a politician and a major newspaper. The reaction would be swift, surgical, and silent. She decided to make her way north towards the Midlands, aiming for a small, isolated cottage she owned near the Peak District. a remote analog sanctuary where she could hide and monitor the fallout of her disclosures. She needed to be off the grid entirely, eliminating her digital signature. First, she had to erase her presence in London. She went to a nondescript post office, purchased a cheap burner phone with cash, and used the old device to send a final cryptic message to Liam. "The shepherd is grazing. Clear the field." This was a warning for him to wipe his systems and cease all communication, knowing that the surveillance net was closing. Next, she returned to her Canary Wharf flat, not to stay, but to retrieve the third and final encrypted drive, a master copy containing not only the data, but also her personal analysis and a digital vault of historical documents supporting the Anunnaki theory, including high-resolution scans of dozens of related cuneiform tablets. This was her legacy, the insurance policy against the establishment burying her findings after her potential capture. The flat felt different, colder. She moved quickly, her senses heightened. She swept the small space for any signs of intrusion, noting the pristine condition of the coffee table, the undisturbed dust on the picture frames. No physical break-in, but she knew the digital intrusion was the more insidious threat. She grabbed the final drive, tucking it into the lining of her trench coat, and then executed a complete wipe of the borrowed laptop's hard drive, using powerful disk-cleaning software that rendered the data irretrievable. She tossed the cheap burner phone into a public rubbish bin several blocks away, ensuring it was near impossible to link back to the flat. As she stepped back into the lift, heading down, she felt a vibration in the pocket of her coat, the faint buzzing residue of the old phone, even though she knew she had disposed of it moments ago. Her paranoia spiked. Had they somehow tagged the coat itself? Was the fear manifesting physically? She dismissed the sensation as stress, focusing instead on the task of escape. She knew they would be tracking her electronically, but London's vast network of CCTV cameras and traffic flow provided another analog challenge. She couldn't rely on a train or coach. Those movements were too easily tracked via ticket purchase or facial recognition at the major terminals. The only option was to rent a car, again paying cash and using a fictitious foreign ID, a carefully prepared contingency document. She walked briskly toward a major car hire depot, feeling the clock ticking rapidly towards the moment when Harrington would read the packet and Davies would start his verification process. The weight of the impending cosmic event, combined with the immediate visceral fear of capture by human agents, was almost unbearable. She was fighting a war on two fronts, the ancient, existential threat above, and the modern bureaucratic machine below. The establishment, represented by Finch and his governmental backers, were simply tools of a much older, darker control mechanism. She believed the suppression of Nibiru wasn't a recent phenomenon. It was a policy spanning millennia, handed down by the Anunnaki themselves to ensure human civilization remained perpetually nascent, never reaching a capacity for interstellar defiance. The car, a nondescript grey Vauxhall, was quickly secured. Evelyn avoided the main motorways initially, hugging the smaller, winding A roads, moving laterally across the country before turning north. She drove for hours, the English countryside blurring into a monotonous pattern of green fields and low stone walls. The heavy clouds ensured the sky remained stubbornly opaque, shielding her from the visible confirmation of her dire news. Yet the darkness served only to amplify her certainty. The Anunnaki Omen was rising, and she, a disgraced astrophysicist in a rented car, was the only human voice screaming the warning into the overwhelming silence of the universe. Evelyn was 3 hours into her journey north, heading past Birmingham, when the sense of being followed transitioned from psychological paranoia to concrete reality. She was driving along a relatively quiet stretch of the M6 motorway, the dense traffic having thinned out slightly. She noticed a black saloon, a high-end Audi, consistently maintaining the same distance behind her grey Vauxhall, mirroring her lane changes and acceleration. It wasn't the police. The car was too unmarked, too sleekly professional. This was the clean surveillance Liam had warned her about, GCHQ or high-level private security, moving with surgical precision. Evelyn felt a surge of cold fury. They had found the Vauxhall's registration, or perhaps tracked the use of the fictitious ID at the rental depot, instantly flagging the transaction. They were not subtle now. They were applying pressure, hoping she would panic and pull over. She checked the rearview mirror again. The Audi maintained a relentless pursuit. Inside, she could only make out the silhouettes of two men, both wearing dark, plain clothes. They were closing the distance, preparing for the intercept. Her only option was to use her knowledge of the geography. She knew the upcoming junction led into the Peak District National Park, a region of rugged hills, narrow lanes, and ancient, confusing rights-of-way. The high-speed efficiency of the Audi was useless in the twisted, winding roads of the Derbyshire Dales. Evelyn executed a sudden, sharp maneuver, crossing two lanes and taking the exit ramp toward the market town of Bakewell. The Audi followed, aggressive and swift, clearly not expecting her sudden departure from the main road. The chase intensified on the narrow, stone-walled country lanes. Evelyn drove expertly, relying on her years of driving holidays in the region. She pushed the rented Vauxhall to its limits, navigating treacherous blind bends and barely squeezing past farm vehicles. The pursuit vehicle, clearly designed for straight-line speed, struggled with the quick turns, its driver having to brake sharply to avoid scraping the dry stone walls that lined the narrow roads. The landscape was brutally beautiful. Rolling hills covered in heather, dark gritstone outcrops, and the pervasive damp smell of moorland. It was a place of deep, ancient peace, now shattered by a high-stakes pursuit. She realized they weren't trying to capture her immediately. They were trying to pressure her into a mistake, a minor accident that would allow them to intervene under the guise of assistance. They wanted the data drive, not a public confrontation. Evelyn spotted an old, barely used farm track leading sharply uphill, overgrown with weeds and shielded from the main road by a thicket of gorse bushes. It was a risk. The track might lead nowhere, but it was the distraction she needed. She slammed the wheel, turning the Vauxhall violently onto the track. The undercarriage scraped harshly on the stones, protesting the abuse. The Audi, momentarily blinded by the dust and debris, hesitated. That hesitation was Evelyn's lifeline. She drove hard up the muddy incline, navigating huge potholes and rock debris. She reached a small plateau, stopping the car near a cluster of old, rusted farming equipment. From this vantage point, she could see the road below. The Audi had stopped at the mouth of the track, its drivers recognizing the futility of chasing her through such terrain. They were communicating via radio, likely calling in ground support or verifying their next move. Evelyn had maybe 30 minutes before they surrounded the area or called in a helicopter, a distinct possibility given the resources required for a surveillance team using an Audi saloon. She grabbed the final drive and her coat. She didn't have time to mourn the rented car. She had to ditch the vehicle and escape on foot into the desolate moorland. The weather, finally, offered a slight favor. The clouds were low, heavy, and promising rain, perfect for hiding. She locked the car, leaving behind all non-essential personal items. She checked the coat lining, ensuring the encrypted drive was secure. As she started trekking across the rugged, uneven ground, she looked back once more at the black saloon waiting below. They were the physical manifestation of the institution's fear, but their earthly power was insignificant compared to the cosmic power she was trying to warn the world about. If you have made it this far without pausing, it is because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content, hit the like button now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The moorland was vast and unforgiving, a maze of deep peat bogs and low-growing shrubs. Evelyn moved with a quiet, efficient determination, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer necessity of survival. The air was cold, damp, and smelled strongly of wet earth and dying bracken. She walked for nearly an hour, utilizing the folds of the land and the increasing gloom of twilight to hide her movement. She knew the area well enough to avoid the worst of the bogs, aiming for a high, distant ridge where she could assess the extent of the pursuit. Just as she reached the ridge, the first raindrops began to fall, huge, cold splatters that quickly became a heavy downpour, transforming the moor into a slick, miserable expanse. The rain was a perfect asset. It obscured visibility and washed away any tracks she might leave on the exposed ground. From the ridge, she saw the lights, not just the Audi, but two other vehicles, unmarked 444s, converging on the area where she had abandoned the Vauxhall. They were systematically beginning a grid search, their headlights sweeping across the lower slopes. The sound of distant radio chatter, faint and metallic, was carried on the wind. Evelyn was now utterly alone, cut off from all support, dependent only on her wits and the heavy encrypted drive in her pocket. She had successfully delivered the political and journalistic bombs, but the fuse was still burning. She needed to survive the night and monitor the world's reaction. She reached her cottage, a tiny, centuries-old structure built of local gritstone, almost invisible against the backdrop of the hill. It was analog perfection. No Wi-Fi, no landline, electricity only from a small solar panel and a wood-burning stove. Inside, the cottage was cold but dry. Evelyn immediately lit the small stove, feeding it carefully harvested peat and kindling. The warmth was slow to come, but the sight of the flickering flames provided a measure of comfort. She brought out her final piece of technology, a powerful but heavily shielded satellite communications kit designed for remote scientific expeditions. It was bulky, slow, and expensive to operate, but crucial for receiving global information without using local, easily traceable communication networks. She established a connection, routing her queries through layers of anonymous proxies. The initial search was targeted. Malcolm Davies, The Guardian. The silence on the journalistic front was deafening. Nothing on The Guardian's front page, nothing in the online science section. Davies had not published yet. He was either still verifying the complex orbital mechanics, or the forces of suppression had moved faster than expected. Evelyn felt a familiar clutch of despair. The speed of disinformation often outpaced the slow, painstaking march of objective truth. Next, she searched for parliamentary news regarding Lady Penelope Harrington. A small, obscure report appeared on a governmental monitoring feed, mentioning that Lady Harrington had submitted an urgent classified question to the Ministry of Defence regarding irregular astronomical data, and was subsequently censured by the Speaker for introducing unsubstantiated panic. The question had been instantly flagged, shut down, and the subject officially buried before it could gain any traction. The establishment had countered both attacks swiftly and effectively. The parliamentary leak was neutralized through bureaucratic control and public shaming. The media leak was likely being choked by the verification process, or Davies had been quietly leaned on by powerful, anonymous sources to delay. Evelyn understood the dynamic instantly. The vast machine of the state was designed to absorb shock and maintain inertia. Her efforts, while disruptive, were being systematically contained. She sat back, watching the firelight play across the stone walls of the cottage. The Anunnaki Omen was not just an astronomical threat. It was a revelation of how easily truth could be suppressed when the stakes involved total societal stability. The world preferred the lie, or at least the people in power mandated it. She pulled out the final encrypted drive. It was time for the final, most desperate measure, broadcasting the raw data to the widest possible decentralized audience, not through official media, but through underground networks and dark web forums, trusting that the sheer volume and complexity of the evidence would eventually overwhelm the censorship. She would make the data public domain, a cosmic truth bomb ticking down in the hands of global amateur astronomers and independent researchers. This was her last act of defiance, her ultimate commitment to the truth derived from the ancient tablets. If this content opened your mind, comment below, "I made it to the end." This helps me understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell because the next episodes go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking the next video. It is the continuation of this journey. The rain stopped just before dawn. Evelyn had spent the entire night uploading the massive data package, slowly feeding the telemetry, models, and translations through her slow, shielded satellite link into dozens of separate, decentralized file-sharing platforms across the globe. She tagged the files with key phrases designed to attract the dedicated skeptical eyes: Atlas gravitational anomaly, Nibiru confirmation, 3600 cycle telemetry. The files were protected only by the sheer difficulty of understanding them. They required a sophisticated knowledge of astrophysics and Sumerian history to fully decode. She had done everything she could. She had transitioned from a discredited academic to a hunted exile, sacrificing her personal safety for a cosmic truth derived from ancient clay and confirmed by modern physics. Exhausted, she extinguished the fire and walked outside, stepping onto the muddy moorland plateau as the first weak rays of the sun broke through the heavy grey clouds, painting the sky in pale shades of orange and bruised purple. The air was fresh, clean and silent, broken only by the bleating of distant sheep. The two 444s were gone from the road below. The search had been called off, perhaps under the assumption that she had perished in the harsh moor conditions, or perhaps because the authorities now deemed her digital silence as sufficient containment. They had failed to retrieve the data, but they believed they had silenced the messenger. Evelyn looked up at the clearing sky. The sun, a feeble, watery disk, struggled to burn off the lingering mist. She wasn't looking at the sun, however. She was looking at the precise location in the pre-dawn sky where, according to the ancient tablets and Marcus's recent telemetry, the invisible Nibiru was currently located, obscured by its high southern trajectory and the immense distance. She stood there, focusing, and felt a profound, chilling sense of presence. It wasn't visual, but almost gravitational, a sensation of immense, invisible mass exerting its subtle influence on the very air she breathed, on the tiny cottage she stood beside, and on the rotation of the earth beneath her feet. She recalled the final, terrifying lines from tablet K3500, a passage she had always feared. "When the Tsar returns, the disk shall be winged, and the shepherds will see the light of the true God. Then will come the binding of the heavens, and the children of the earth shall wait for the judgment of the luminous ones." The alignment of Atlas with Nibiru had passed. The seven thunders were beginning their silent approach. Evelyn knew the planet itself wouldn't be visible to the naked eye for months yet, but its influence was already here, woven into the fabric of the solar system, twisting the paths of smaller bodies, stirring the seismic pot of Earth. The final disturbing question remained unanswered. What exactly did the Anunnaki want upon their return? Control, resources, or simple, overwhelming domination? The tablet spoke of creation and destruction in equal measure. Evelyn could only wait, watching the horizon, feeling the weight of the coming era. The academic world had dismissed her, the government had hunted her, but the cosmos itself was now preparing to validate her truth. The Anunnaki omen was no longer a prophecy. It was the unfolding reality, starting now, witnessed only by a disgraced British astrophysicist standing alone on a damp moorland, ready for the next terrifying chapter of human history. The next segment in this unfolding cosmic drama will explore the immediate, measurable effects of Nibiru's gravitational wake on Earth's deep geological structures and the ensuing global chaos. You won't want to miss the shocking evidence that the seven thunders have already begun.